I'm glad you're all here to learn about the TIPS model. We're here to stop problem admiring and identify a more efficient model for solving problems in schools. So my name is Rachel Eisenberg. I'm a consulting and research psychologist at the Devereaux Center for Effective Schools. I'm here with the Gordon Center for, the Gordon Early Literacy Center. And the principal and one of their coaches are here with me, Tamara and Jen, and they'll be here sharing their process for how they use TIPS in an early childhood center. If you're a school-wide person, don't fret. This is also applicable to school-wide. So I want to make sure we acknowledge those who developed the team-initiated problem-solving process. Ann Todd and her colleagues at the University of Oregon and at the University of North Carolina. And you can see here one of their research studies on, their training manual on TIPS. Just have to acknowledge that this is not our model, but we're going to share how we apply it. Our objectives for today are to first provide you with an overview of the TIPS model. We'll also identify effective meeting practices within the TIPS model, so what are good foundations for an effective meeting, and then we'll talk about how to use data to effectively problem solve. So TIPS includes two main components: how do we run a meeting effectively, and then how do we problem solve within that meeting. We'll also then talk about how to implement this process within program-wide settings and within school-wide settings. So when we talk about problem admiring and solving problems, it's often very easy to get caught in that rut of like, we have this problem, so the problem in the cafeteria, and it never gets better, and we sit and talk about it for an hour every week, and that cafeteria still, we have so many issues in that cafeteria, or the recess yard, or arrival, or dismissal, or whatever it might be within your school. I'm sure you can all think about those meetings that you've been in month after month, and it's just the same problem over and over again. And that gets really frustrating. We're all here because we want to solve problems in the schools that we work in, but we can't solve them effectively if we consistently go through the same motions every time and we're not using data to problem solve. So we have a better process through TIPS to be able to problem solve more efficiently. One of the key things that we use within TIPS is data, and I think I mentioned that already. Decisions that we make in team meetings and within school systems are more efficient and effective when we use data. When we use data, we identify layers. So we first identify the big picture. Is there a problem? What is that problem? And then we make it more precise and we say, where is it happening? What kind of problem behavior is happening? Who's involved? And then we make sure it's super specific down to how often that problem is happening. When we use data, we ask the right questions. So we use data to identify and refine problems, make sure we're looking in the right location or with the right population of students. And doing this allows us to come up with more functional solutions and place the problem in context. So where is the problem happening and with which students and all of those precise components we need to think about. So before we get into exactly what the TIPS model is, and we're going to walk through step by step, I want to briefly go through some research to identify that this is actually an effective model. So first we're going to look at whether or not TIPS improves meeting foundations. So does everyone come on time, and is everyone paying attention and not on their computers or stepping out of the meeting, and is everyone really focused in at that moment? And then we're also going to talk about the problem solving process. Is it effective for improving problem solving? So Newton and colleagues in 2012 looked at 17 teams that were trained in TIPS and 17 teams that were not trained in TIPS. And you can see here on the left the pre-TIPS implementation of meeting foundations. Do they come on time? Is everyone participating effectively? That was around 50 to 60% for both teams, and we can see that blue line, the teams that were trained in TIPS, after they were trained, they improved in their meeting foundations. So this process can improve your efficiency in having a meeting. And it also improved their problem-solving process. So pre-TIPS, both teams, or both sets of teams, were around less than 50%. And then we can see that blue line of teams that were trained in TIPS, they're problem solving much more effectively and developing solutions for the problems in their schools and that their teams identify, they're able to come up with more efficient and effective solutions. Overall, teams can improve quickly once they're trained in TIPS, and we also identify through the TIPS model that data is central and critical for problem solving and ongoing adaptation of your solutions to make sure that things are moving forward effectively long term. We can see through a fidelity measure called the DORA, we were looking at whether or not Ann Todd and her colleagues were looking at whether or not TIPS was implemented effectively, and we can see that in another study looking at 19 teams that were trained in TIPS and 19 teams that were not, we can see that overall the blue set of teams increased after they were trained in TIPS. They increased in their meeting foundations and in their problem-solving effectiveness. So overall, the process improved the likelihood that the solutions were implemented, the solutions that the teams came up with were implemented, and it increased the likelihood of student improvement. And that's why we all sit around as teams and work on PBIS and make sure that we're doing what we need to do to help improve student outcomes. That's why we do what we do. One other interesting component to this is not just that we see improvements in student outcomes and more efficient meetings, but we also see more efficient implementation time for solutions. So when we look at how long it takes to solve a problem based on a primary statement like there's a problem in the cafeteria and kids are acting up in the cafeteria, we need to fix that, versus it's 7th graders in the cafeteria or Head Start students in the first lunch or whatever it might be, if we can more precisely define that problem, we're going to be more efficient in implementing the solution. So when we have a more primary statement, planning time throughout the year takes a little over 20 hours, but when we have a more precise problem that we're trying to problem solve, it takes about half that time. When there's a primary statement that we're trying to address, it takes staff approximately 17 hours to problem solve through the year, but when we have a more precise statement, staff implementation time goes down quite a bit. So staff time is saved here, which is a huge plus. And lastly, implementation time for students trying to make sure they get through the solution that you're trying to implement. It takes many more hours for students to go through the process of the solution when it's a primary statement, but when we precisely define the problem, it's much more efficient for students as well. So all pluses here, a lot of time saved, much more efficient meetings, and a lot less problem admiring. So without further ado, here's our model. It's team-initiated problem solving, again from the folks at the University of Oregon and UNC at Charlotte. So TIPS has multiple components, and I'm going to show you this as a basic model first, and then we're going to go through step by step. The basic foundation for TIPS is called meeting foundations, and it's all the components of a meeting. As I said earlier, does everyone come on time? Is everyone paying attention? Do you know where you have to meet each time so not everyone's texting ahead of time to figure out where do we need to be? So meeting foundations is the background, and we're going to go through that in detail, what that looks like. Then once we have good meeting foundations, we collect and use data on what the problems might be in the school. We have good data systems, and we use the data to identify the problem precisely. So what's happening, who's involved, when is it happening, where is it happening, and why. Then we identify a goal, so how can we change and what do we want to get to. Then we identify a solution plan to help meet that goal, and it has to fit contextually, so we think about our context as a team. And then we implement that plan and make sure that we're going to do that with good fidelity, and then monitor the impact. So basically, did we do what we said we would do, and is the problem solved? And then we make a summative evaluation decision. So what next? Do we move on to a new problem? Do we modify our solution and try to address this a little differently because we didn't meet our goal? Where are we going to go next? And then we may identify a new problem with precision. So ultimately, this whole process is based on meeting foundations. Data is at the center. We use data in every step of the process, and it's a cyclical process, so we keep going around. Not always solving the same problem, not always admiring the same problem, but moving through the process in a step-by-step way. So I'm going to hand this over to Jen, who's going to share a little bit more about the Gordon Center and how they implemented TIPS, piece by piece.
So I'm Jen. I work at the Gordon Center. I'm one of the coaches, and I support the teachers in the classrooms. Our Gordon Early Literacy Center is part of the Chester County Intermediate Unit, and the building is pretty unique. It is solely a preschool building. So all the students in this building are preschool students, ages 3 to 5, and we have 4 different programs in the building. We have Head Start programs, preschool special education programs which support students with speech needs, itinerant needs, maybe autistic support students, and developmental delay students. We also are paired with the local school district and their pre-K program, and then we also are paired with a unified classroom as well. Our building has approximately 350 students and 70 staff, and we started the implementation of TIPS at the beginning of this school year. So as Rachel said, one of the big things that is put in place by TIPS is the meeting foundations. And these things really support how we problem solve within our building. So we're going to look at some of the logistics of meeting foundations in our building. One of the things that we have is a shared space for all our electronic documents and hard copies for staff to easily be able to get them within the building. We've developed a consistent meeting schedule at the beginning of the year so staff are aware of all meetings throughout the year. And we've designated that meeting location and made sure that that space is available whenever we need it. We also have access to technology in this meeting location so that we are able to project different things, make sure staff who can't physically be there are able to join us and be part of the team that day. There's some other things that make it a successful meeting and that we make sure to implement whenever we have our meetings. We always like to make sure an administrator is present. There's 75% of our team present, that our members have come prepared so that they have reviewed our last notes and done any task that is necessary for them. Our meetings start and end on time. We always have our action plan with us so that we can review it. We've defined the roles and responsibilities for the meeting, and we're going to talk more specifically about what that looks like. Our meeting minutes are in a form so that we have something physical to reference, and our decisions are documented so that all staff is aware, and we're not just recalling from memory. So this is a basic team agreement. And this team agreement is specifically aligned to the different expectations within the building. So the expectations were be respectful, be responsible, and be real. And so the team agreement is linked, and all the things that we would like to have as part of our meeting are linked to those expectations, similar to the building. This is really helpful for when team members come in and out. We've had a lot of maternity leaves this year, and so new team members have joined and team members have left, and so being able to share this information with them and not just having to recall it throughout our meetings has been helpful for them to jump right back on track, and it helps us not lose time. These are our identified roles as part of our TIPS process. We have an administrator, a facilitator, a minute taker, a data analyst, other active team members, and a timekeeper. And we're going to look more specifically at what some of these roles do within our problem-solving process. So we're looking at the roles and responsibilities for the facilitator, the minute taker, and the data analyst. And these roles have responsibilities both before, during, and after. And so if we look at before our meeting, a facilitator's role is to ask all team members for agenda items. So an email goes out to the whole team to find out if anybody has anything relevant that needs to be put on the agenda to make sure that we discuss it at our meeting. The minute taker might prepare the agenda, including the data report that the data analyst is going to send them. So prior to the meeting, the data analyst is reviewing the data, updating the status of our previous problem, and defining new problems with precision. During our meeting, it's the facilitator's responsibility to manage the flow of the meeting, so that person is keeping everyone on task, making sure we're sticking to the agenda so that we're being mindful of our time. The minute taker's responsibility is to record any notes or decisions that we make so we are able to go back and reference them if needed. And the data analyst's responsibility is to lead the data discussion and review either our visual representation of data or our table of data presented. After the meeting, the facilitator and the data analyst are kind of off the hook. They've done all that they need to do. It's now the minute taker's job to make sure that the notes are completed and then sent out to the whole team so that everybody is aware of what they need to be doing as part of our discussion that day. Keep in mind that when you develop these roles and responsibilities, they can be flexible. Specifically in our program, our facilitator develops the agenda instead of the minute taker, which is kind of nice because the minute taker already has to do a few things during and after the meeting, so it allows us to share some of those responsibilities. This is a sample of our roles that we have in our building. The primary facilitator and primary data analyst are indicated and sent to all the core teams so people know who to reach out to. Another thing that we did was have a backup person, and we have used several of those backup people this year. Several maternity leaves have happened, and we've needed a backup person to hop in and jump right on board, and it's been very helpful because the backup person has already been trained and familiar, and we didn't skip a beat. We just were able to keep going.
Are your primary facilitator and primary data analyst a static role, like you would be that person every meeting?
Yes. So the question was, are the primary facilitator, primary data analyst, timekeeper, are they all consistent roles? And yes, that person is the role, at least for that school year. For this year, some of these roles did change due to absences and things like that, but that's why it was helpful to have the backup person. Additionally, we developed the schedule, and that schedule was developed back at the beginning of the school year. We identified when it would happen, where it would happen, and all staff was given that schedule at the beginning of the school year. So now we're going to look at the actual meeting agenda and the minutes form. So this form is either created by your team facilitator or your minute taker. It's sent out to all team members 24 hours in advance of the meeting. So all team members get a copy of this and are able to review it. We use this to guide our meeting discussion. So this is the team facilitator's role to really keep our discussion going so that we stay on track and it doesn't really become a complaint fest about what's happening in the building. We want our time to be productive. We don't have a lot of it. And so if we keep ourselves on track, we're able to be more productive with our time. We also use the agenda and the minutes form to monitor our progress. So we're able to review decisions that we've made at previous meetings. We're able to review the task list, which indicates who's doing something, when it's due, and who's responsible for that. We're also able to evaluate how effective our meetings are. And we're going to look more specifically at our agenda and each of those components. So this is a sample of the meeting minutes. So let's break down the meeting minutes. The very top talks about when the meeting is, who's facilitating, who's the minute taker, who's the data analyst. We also indicate the next meeting because without fail, you always have a staff member that lost that piece of paper that said when all the meetings were for the whole school year. We take attendance at all our meetings. So remember we said 75% of our team needs to be there to have our tips meeting that day. So we're taking attendance at our meeting. We have agenda items that keep us on track with what we know we want to discuss during the meeting. Sometimes non-agenda items come up and there might be a space for us to put that so that we know this is something we want to discuss at our next meeting. We have a system in place to review fidelity. It could be a variety of things, but this would be dependent on your program. We look heavily at the TPOT in our program, and we also look at the BOQ at the end of the year. Then there's a spot for the data analyst report, and this is where we also review the status of our previous problems. So this is all of it all put together. And then this is the second page of it. So on this page, we discuss our new precise problem statement, and we're going to talk about how to develop that, what that looks like, and how important that is. We also have a task list. So the task list is really important. It's really what holds us accountable for doing what we say we're gonna do. On the task list, it indicates the item, who's responsible for that item, when we intend for that item to get done. And several different members are on this task list at any given time. The last thing we do at all of our data meetings is evaluate our meetings. So we look to see if we found our time to be effective. One of the first questions we asked was today a good use of our time? And the team decides yes or no. We also look at how well we track what we're supposed to be completing. And we sometimes have to be pretty honest about how well we are tracking because sometimes of the year it doesn't go as well as other times. So this is all of that put together. This is a sample specifically from our Gordon Early Literacy Center. So at the top it says the meeting, the next meeting. On the very right side in the middle you can see it takes attendance of the members that were present. The next thing is our to-do list. So these are our agenda items. Here's where our data analyst report comes in. So the data analyst developed this and sent it to the team facilitator, and then it was input into the agenda. And then on the right side, you can see that we evaluated what we did, and we're going to talk more specifically about what that piece looks like as well. So based on our data report, we decided on a new precise problem statement, and that is here. And then any agenda items that need to go along with that are then added down the bottom for us to continue to support our students. Some additional agenda items, and then you can see right down at the very bottom is where we evaluate our meeting and whether we thought our time was effective. So Tamara is going to talk about problem solving and help you understand how to develop that precise problem statement.
I'm Tamara. I supervise Head Start in Chester County, but I am also the administrator for the CCIU at the Gordon Early Literacy Center. So you heard Rachel talk earlier about this meeting foundations and the TIPS model. So we do a lot of collecting and using of our data, all so that we can identify some very precise problems. And I'm sure that everybody who's sitting in this room knows that a problem is a difference between what we expect and what's actually happening. And we know that as teachers and administrators and school-based staff, we have very high expectations of our students, and we need to do everything we can to help them meet those expectations. When we're looking at problems, we want to talk about very specific issues, and we learned this with great experience at Gordon, because you heard how we started TIPS in the fall of this year, but we have been doing PBIS for 2 years previously in our building and realized that we needed the support of TIPS and this format in order to be more successful in solving our problems. So what we've learned is that it's really important to state a problem very specifically so that everybody sitting in the room understands the same problem. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but when you've got a bunch of different people from a bunch of different roles talking about something, it's easy not to look at the same information in the same way. So we really need to make sure that we're clear about the problem and that we're all working on the same problem. So when we started out this process, we were very stuck in what I would call primary problems, or what I've learned from Rachel is primary problems. We would just look at one problem. We would have some very general observations. We wouldn't really be able to problem solve in a meaningful way because we didn't have all the data that we needed. So we've moved into what are called primary problem statements. So back when we started, we might have had a statement that said something like, we have too many behavior incident reports coming from a specific classroom. And what we learned was that we need to look more specifically at why those behaviors are happening in that classroom. So our data that you heard a little bit about from Jen allowed us to move into these more precise types of statements that are very specific about which children are engaging in the behavior, what's happening in their classroom, what time of day it's happening. So a good example for us was that when we moved into this very large building with 350 students, we had to change some of the ways that we did things. And all of our students eat in a cafeteria now, and in our first year, we knew that cafeteria was causing us some behavioral problems, but we couldn't figure out why, and we were just sort of guessing at solutions. Some of our solutions were effective and some were not as effective, And what TIPS has done is really let us get specific data so we never feel like we're guessing about what a problem is anymore. So this is a precision problem flower. And in order to have a great problem statement, we need to make sure the flower is entirely full. We want our data to tell a story, so we want to be able to understand who's involved in the incident, and that always sounds like it should be a student, but usually there's someone else involved too, whether that's a peer or a parent or a teacher or an assistant or a coach or anybody else who might be involved in our building. We want to know what's happening in the problem and how that's different than what our expectation is, when it's happening, where it's happening, why it's happening. That's been a really big one in terms of teaching our building-wide staff to really understand what motivation might be for different behaviors, and then how often that happens. So when we started out, we might have said something along the lines of inappropriate behavior is increasing on the playground. And a more precise statement would look like bullying is occurring on the playground during first recess. It's being done mostly by 4 fourth grade boys and seems to be maintained by social praise from the bystander peer group. That level of data would really help your team be able to talk through what can be done differently for those 4 students, as opposed to just we're having a problem on the playground. Another non-precise problem could be students are getting referred frequently for technology violations. Much more precise when it includes who those students are, what time of day it's happening, and what that problem looks like. When we started out collecting data, we started using Behavior Partnership and their BIRs. Behavior Partnership was great for us in a lot of ways. It's very specific to early childhood, and so all of the language that was included in the BIR made sense to our teachers. It was easy for them to complete those BIRs. It was easy for them to turn them in. We could all talk very clearly about what was happening and how it was happening. But the challenge that came from that system was that it just didn't allow us to pull data in the very specific manner that we wanted to be able to get that who, what, when, where, and why to do our TIPS process. So we moved to SWIS, School-Wide Information System, towards the end of last year. The advantages to SWIS are really related to that specific data, and we're going to show you some examples of that in a couple minutes. But the challenge is that it is developed for a more school-age population. So there has been a lot of training that we've had to do with our teachers and a lot of crosswalks in terms of what the language would look like in a school-age issue as compared to our preschool issues. So for example, we don't often have kids who are out of bounds, which is a word on the SWIS data report, but we might have kids who try to elope. So trying to teach our teachers the difference between the terminology has been a little bit of a challenge, but they've come a long way. It is important to consider what type of data is going to be most successful for your team. So again, we started out thinking that Behavior Partnership and the tie to early childhood was going to be best for us. We learned over the course of time that we needed something a little bit different. There are some other tools out there, so it's important that if you're thinking about TIPS, you really take a good look at what those tools look like in terms of the language for your teachers, but also the data that you can get out of it for your problem solving. Oops, I went backwards, sorry. So this is what our SWIS data looks like, and I know it's a little bit fuzzy, but basically what it's showing you is that you can see very specific data about our school. So we pool our data over the course of a month, and we can look at the number of referrals, how many school days those occurred on, how frequently they're occurring in a day. We can see if there's a trend in the data related to a specific problem. We can compare it to what happened in the previous month. We can also look at all the different locations and see what is happening with the most frequency and how many referrals are coming from each area. And then as Jen mentioned, we have several different programs. So again, this is a school-age program. We've assigned each of our programs to a high school grade. We've got 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, and 12th graders in our 3 to 5 population, but we can see which grade then those referrals are most frequently coming from. We take all of that data to build those precise problem statements that Jen showed you on our agenda. So for example, In November, our biggest issue was that students in the Head Start program engage in physical aggression at noon, mostly on Tuesdays, to obtain attention from a peer or a teacher at a rate of 1.2 per day. And then Jen's going to talk to you a little bit about how we then problem solve for that. Right? No, it's still me, sorry. I was just going to throw it to you, Jen. So the next thing that we do is set some goals during our meetings. So for adults, what those goals might look like are how frequently we might exercise, or how much weight we want to lose or gain, or how much time we're spending on social media, or how we're saving money. But in order to have any success with any of those goals, we can't just say this is what I want to do. We have to really set ourselves something specific to work towards. So for frequency of exercise, maybe your goal would be to exercise 3 times a week during 1 month. And maybe you would look to decrease your time on social media to 10 minutes a day. I would love for my own children to do that. Perhaps you want to lose 15 pounds before the month of June, or save $150 to go shopping on Black Friday. But as you can see, each of those goals are specific and they're short-term so that you can achieve them. And that's something that we've really worked with our team and the TIPS process to be able to repeat in our group. Each of these goals includes what we want to do, how much we want to achieve, and when we're planning to achieve it. So we want all of our goals to be measurable and realistic. And we want them to be SMART. I think probably most of you are familiar with SMART goals, but those are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And we build all of that in the TIPS process off of those precise problem statements that our data analyst prepares for us. So for example, in that month of November, with our specific problem where we had 1.2 acts of aggression per day, we decided as a team that we thought it was reasonable to reduce physical aggression to a rate of 0.9 a day. I'm sure that everybody in this room knows that our dream would be that we would get to 0 acts of physical aggression in a day. But we have to be realistic about what we're going to be able to provide to teachers in terms of education related to the goal, what we're going to be able to expect from our students, and how much we're actually going to be able to successfully implement by the next month. And that's how quickly we turn around and relook at our data and consider whether we're still working on the right goal or whether we need to move to the next. Now I'm really going to give it back to Jen.
So now we've identified our problem with the precision statement, and we have identified the goal that we want to change. So now we need to figure out what the solution will be, and then create, implement, and how to implement it within our classrooms. So there's a few different areas that we look at when we're attempting to build solutions, and this kind of guides our discussion during our meeting. We look at prevention, so what's happening in the environment that we can change that may help us avoid having problem behavior. We look at teaching. What types of behaviors do we need to teach our students to have? We look at recognition. Are we reinforcing our students enough for doing the right stuff or doing the good stuff? We look at extinction. Are we reinforcing our students when they're not doing the right stuff? And we don't want to be reinforcing them for that stuff, so we need to be careful of that. And then we look at the consequences, and we need to make sure that our consequences are implemented very consistently for our students. So oftentimes we try to focus on prevention strategies, what we can teach our students, especially at the preschool level with students 3 to 5. Oftentimes they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, and that's why they're doing the wrong thing. So teaching is a big thing for us. Preschool students also love attention, so we really try to hover in that reinforcement by providing them with attention and recognition for doing the stuff that we want to see them do. So our precise statement is at the top. Our goal was to reduce it to 0.9 instances of physical aggression per day. And so looking at this table, we look at those 6 components that we talked about. So prevention, teaching, recognition, extinction, and correction. And our goal here is to choose the solutions that have the highest impact, but also the highest feasibility. And sometimes that's not always possible, and so there's a give and take here. Sometimes you have to decide on a solution that may not have as much of an impact for your student, but is really feasible for staff to implement, or that has a really high impact, but it may be difficult for staff to implement, but we have to figure out how that can work for our program. So for this specific solution, in order to prevent some problem behavior, we decided that we would inform our students of earning double pom-poms on Tuesdays, which was when the behavior was occurring, if they met the expectation for the behavior, and we would do this during their calendar time each day. So we would let them know that on Tuesdays, you're gonna get double pom-poms. And the pom-poms are what we use to let our students know you're doing things correctly, great job, we love it. So this particular solution had medium impact. Just telling our students about it wasn't necessarily going to make our problem better. But the feasibility for teachers was really high. It was really something easy that they would be able to do. In this particular brainstorm session, we didn't come up with anything that we felt like we needed to teach at that time, so there wasn't something that we decided to be a solution. We did look at the rewards for our students, so we were providing them with double pom-poms. So for things that they did, and our expectation was for them to be safe, so things that they did to be safe, they were gonna get 2 pom-poms that day instead of 1. Impact should have been really high for our students. However, feasibility would be a little more difficult for staff because now they had to remember that on Tuesdays I had to deliver 2 pom-poms. We didn't change anything about extinction procedures that we were going to use, and our correction procedure stayed the same. So we had already previously defined a consequence procedure for our students, and that has high impact and high feasibility, and that's been consistent within our program, and so that was going to remain the same. So once you brainstorm the solution, you have to put it into play. So we develop an action plan, and our action plan helps us decide who will do each task and when it will be completed. So as you can see, this is our agenda, and so the third column is specific to the action that we were going to do. So we just talked about how we're going to have a double pom-pom day Tuesday, and our students are going to receive 2 pom-poms when they're caught following the rule of being safe. So we put that on there. All staff knows what it is, and it also indicates when we're going to do it, and so we're going to do it during calendar time when the students have it in their classroom. In addition to it being within the data report, it's also often found within the task list for our staff. So it's not enough that we put it on a piece of paper and say, hey, we're going to do it. We also have to let all 70 staff in our building know. And so that's really important because we can talk about all we want with, our 20-so people at our meeting, but we need our staff that's not there to know that this is something we're doing. And so it's somebody's responsibility to make sure the calendar pieces are created. And it's somebody's responsibility to communicate this solution to all the staff so everybody is handling it in the same way. So now that we've decided on our solution, the next thing we need to do is implement our solution with high integrity. We want to make sure that our solution is being implemented in the way we expected it to be implemented. So, of course, we're going to develop a plan for that too. So we're developing a plan to look at the fidelity of implementation. So looking at the fidelity, well, did we do it? We're also developing a plan to look at how much of an impact this had on our students' behavior. So what were our outcomes in our data? There's a couple different things you can look at when you're monitoring fidelity of implementation. One of the big things is that you want to measure the degree of which the intervention is implemented the way you expected it to be implemented. Our goal is always 80% implementation, so we want to make sure that about 80% of our staff are implementing this the way we anticipated for it to be implemented. We can use a variety of ways to kind of look at that. We might look at a percent, you might look at a rate, but you're using some sort of measurable term to decide this was implemented with fidelity. So there are some strategies to decide if it's happening in your program. We want to make sure it's easy for staff to record this data. Otherwise, what's likely to happen is they won't do it, and then we don't get the information that we need. And then we don't know that if it was really fidelity or if it was just that staff didn't fill out that 25-page questionnaire that we asked them to do. So some general ideas, you could do a fidelity checkboard in which staff just simply put whether they did 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and they take their sticky note and they put it on the number that indicates how many times they handed out 2 pom-poms that day. During a staff meeting, you could do a fist to 5, and it's just a quick opportunity for staff to have their hand ready, and you simply just say, on your hand, 0 to 5, how many times did you hand out 2 pom-poms today? There are some more time-consuming ways that we can look at fidelity. So a fidelity checklist is a way for us to check to see if students or if staff were able to implement our procedure. This can be time-consuming. You can have staff self-monitor, but if they're answering 10 or 15 questions, even if it's yes or no, that's taking them a lot of extra time. Direct observation is another opportunity. But I don't know about you, we don't have a whole lot of extra people that can just run in and observe all 70 of your staff in a week or in a month. So this one's a little more time consuming. You get really good information, but it's not always feasible. So consider that when you are trying to decide what your plan for fidelity will be. So our plan for fidelity goes onto our sheet. It's indicated how we're going to check to make sure that we have done our plan the way we said we were going to do our plan. So in this case, we decided that we would have the Discover student that comes and volunteers at our school walk around with the survey for the teachers, and without seeing each other's answers, that student would go room to room to get teachers to identify how many days they had encouraged the classroom expectations prior to these transitions that were occurring on Tuesdays. So now we decided on our plan of how to check for fidelity. So now we're going to make sure we monitor that the fidelity has actually occurred and that our solution has had the impact that we were hoping it would. So did we do what we said we were going to do? And did we make a difference? This is just an example. So we examined the fidelity of our implementation. Did you give double pom-poms on that day? Yes or no? Or maybe it was, how many times did you do that? The other thing we do is look at the effectiveness of the solution. And so like Tamara had talked about, our Swiss allows us to look at student data and compare it to previous month's data and current data to determine if our students' rate of problem behavior has reduced as we had hoped it did. So we did fidelity, now we want to check on the solution and the impact it had. So in this section, I know it's small, but it talks about the level of implementation. So a couple different things. It says not started, partial implementation, implemented with fidelity, and maybe we stopped it for some reason. So on this particular problem, we had partial implementation. We also then look at our outcome data. So our data was previously at 1.1. We're looking now and it actually is still at, 1.2. It's still at 1.2. So then we look at the next steps, and this is the thing that is our next step within our TIPS process. We're looking at our data and we're deciding, and we're looking to see if we implemented with fidelity. We have to decide what to do next. So in this case, we opted to modify the plan. And we made sure that we prepped the materials so that all teachers had the calendar pieces and were reminded of double pom-poms on Tuesdays. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel.
So that was a lot of information and a big set of steps, basically, that we just shared with you. So we want you to be able to think about how you might be able to implement tips on your own in your schools. So that whole process, identifying a problem with precision, setting goals, putting in place solutions, looking at data to know whether or not, A, what the problem is, but whether or not then you meet your goal, and whether you've done your solution with integrity. So we want you to think about how you can incorporate this, whether you're in a program-wide setting or whether you're in a school-wide setting or an alternative setting. At Center for Effective Schools, we consult with programs of all types, and we've been able to adapt tips within those settings. So we want you to think about how you can do this in your setting. What kind of challenges might you encounter? One of the things that we noticed, and we started to do this within program-wide, is that the data system was the biggest challenge, I think. And Tamara and Jen might be able to speak better to that, but I think the data system itself, as we showed you with the model, data is the center of the entire process. So if you don't have a good data system that's going to allow you to precisely identify a problem, set goals, monitor the problem over time, you're not going to be able to effectively solve problems as efficiently. So we want you to think about what kind of data system challenges might you encounter, and how you might be able to think about using tips perhaps even in advanced tiers for tier 2 or tier 3 to effectively problem solve. So we have a few minutes for questions or thoughts here if you want to, if you have any thoughts or questions. Yes, in the back.
Do you have a suggested meeting time to accomplish all of those things?
So do we have a suggested meeting time to accomplish? So do you mean like a regular meeting schedule, what our schedule would be? Right. So for tier 1, typically we have monthly meetings for tips. At the, in the early childhood setting, what we've done so far with you guys is we have a one meeting per month, that focuses on the data, and then one meeting per month on the off weeks. So we'll meet every other week, and the off week we'll talk about implementation issues, the more typical kind of team meeting that you might think about, like how do we make sure we have enough pom-poms, or how can we, resolve this issue among staff, or make sure staff have enough forms or whatever. But we make sure that we look at the data and have a data meeting for tips once a month for the whole year. Good question. Yes.
So agenda items are generated from the data, not from like the teacher in 300 is complaining about 5 students coming to class.
Great question. So the agenda items are generated from data, not from staff saying they have concerns and we want to talk about X, Y, Z. It's both. So there is a component of the minutes form, and I'm going to scroll really quickly all the way back and as I'm talking. There's a component of the agenda form that talks about agenda items separately. So the crux of the meeting is talking about the data. But in the meeting minutes, there is a section for agenda items separately. So you can see this is the Gordon meeting agenda. And we have like the problem based on data is the most of the meeting here. We talk about any new problems, and then at the bottom here is agenda items. And those agenda items are what team members might say to the facilitator ahead of time. Hey, I heard from my partner teacher that there's another issue related to something else. Can we talk about that at our PBIS meeting? Yes, let's put it on the agenda. So the team member would send that to the facilitator who puts it on the agenda here. It won't be the primary focus for the meeting. It might be like a 3, 5, here we have 5 minutes, 7 minutes, and 2 minutes allotted for those topics, but there is an opportunity to discuss those topics. Your question too leads to the point why we also had bi-weekly meetings. So we had one meeting per month as a data meeting with a little bit of agenda item discussion, and then the other meeting per month was more involved in those kinds of issues that might come up, teachers having questions about certain things. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
5 minutes allotted and the problem has not been resolved. Can you add more time?
Great question. So that's where the team might say, listen, we're at the end of our 5 minutes, and we have our timekeeper. Tamara's actually our timekeeper. And she'll say to the team, listen, our time's almost up. What do we want to do? Do we have a little extra time to stay? Can we finish this conversation? Or do we need to have a separate side conversation? Who needs to be involved in that? And then it becomes a to-do item to set up another little, chat among 3 people who need to be there for that conversation, maybe at the end of the day. So we try to make sure that it's efficient. Otherwise, that conversation might side rail the whole meeting, and then we don't talk about everything that we needed to get to. Good question. Other thoughts or questions? Great, so I'm gonna scroll all the way back to my end here because this is, and I really went to the end. This process is, as I said, not something we created. It's something that we coach and support. And so it is freely available information about TIPS. So there are resources on the PBIS.org website. There's a video. You can watch actually a TIPS meeting in action. That TIPS meeting is a school-age TIPS meeting, but as you can see, a lot of the components of the process are the same, whether it would be school-wide, program-wide, or even in an alternative setting. So that's available there. And if you have any other questions or comments or concerns, hopefully not, but feel free to reach out to any one of us. Our information is available here, and we'll make sure this gets posted on the PAPBS website. So thank you.